Um, when I was Henry Ford, we had some fun, and Doug Parks was like, today we're going to go more deeply into quite a few aspects of his life. How many of you worked for Ford Motor Company at one time? Okay. How many of you have ever seen Henry Ford or met him? A couple of you. I remember you were telling me about it. Wonderful. Wonderful. How many worked for other automotive companies or suppliers? Any GM people? Chrysler? Okay. I just finished working on a program on William Durant, founder of General Motors, and then I'm finishing one up on Walter Chrysler. So I'll have all the big threes. Maybe we talk about them sometime. Henry Ford, this is the 150th anniversary of his birth. July 30th was his birthday. And so some of these programs have been promoted by the Henry Ford Heritage Association and the Motor Cities Heritage Association. I'll talk about them a little bit later. But let's get right into Henry. Henry Ford spent most of his life making headlines. Good, bad, but never indifferent. Many credit him with creating the middle class in this country. When he was young, less than 25% of all Americans lived in cities, and when he died in 1947, at age 83, nearly 65% of all Americans lived in cities. So he was an icon of the transition from the agricultural to industrial America, and many of you have gone through parts of that history as I have. Another way of looking at it, he was born just after the Battle of Gettysburg and lived to see the atomic age unveiled with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So what a period in history that he lived through and obviously influenced. Look. Okay, let's get back here. Sorry. He was one of 8 children, William and Mary Ford, born on a family farm near Dearborn at the corner of Ford and Greenfield Roads. There's a small park there that marks the site. Shown on the left here, it's a nice little park just outside the gates of the Henry Ford Village Retirement Community. So if you ever get down there, make sure you stop and spend a little time in that park. I'll tell you a little about what my group does, but we provided Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, and Thomas Edison for their 20th anniversary dinner a couple weeks ago there at the Henry Ford Village. He attended a one-room school for 8 years, learned from the famous McGuffey readers. He helped his father on the farm. He was close to his mother, who died when he was age 12. Years later, he wrote, "My mother used to say, when I grumbled about the chores or anything else on the farm, you may have pity on others, but you must not pity yourself." And so he got a lot of his work ethic from his mother. I'm off to the side here a little bit. Sorry.
You got to email this.
Okay, either way. At age 16, he left the farm, walked 13 miles to Detroit, and landed a job at the Detroit Dry Dock Company, where he learned about steam engines. After 3 years, he returned to the farm and worked part-time for the Westinghouse Engine Company as kind of a field troubleshooter on steam engines. He built a small farm locomotive tractor, a little machine shop behind the house using a steam engine. Yeah, it does work good. He met Clara Bryant at a local dance, married her 3 years later in 1888. She was 22 and he was 25. They set up housekeeping on a tract of land given to them by his father. He farmed and operated the lumber mill till the wood was gone, but he didn't want to be a farmer. So he moved back to Detroit for a job with the Edison Illuminating Company prior to even mentioning it to Clara. He got the job and then he told her about it. But she was very supportive in all his efforts. They moved quite a bit in their early life. November 6, 1893, Clara gave birth to their only child, Edsel Bryant Ford, named after a boyhood friend who later headed up Ford's chemical laboratories. Well, Henry was made chief engineer at the main Detroit Edison Illuminating Company plant. He was responsible for maintaining electric service to the city for 14 hours a day. But he worked irregular hours and had time to experiment at work and do some projects. So did his associates. So he built a gasoline engine in 1893. He first fired it up on Christmas Eve, clamped to the kitchen sink, while Clara was preparing the Christmas turkey. Now, she couldn't have been too upset because part of her job was to pour a little gasoline in as a primer at the top. So she was, again, very supportive. Well, his first car was built in 1896. He called it the quadricycle because it used 4 bicycle tires. So it wasn't a bicycle, it was a quadricycle. It was a buggy frame on 4 bicycle tires. He built it in a shed behind his home. Here's a replica of the shed that's at the Greenfield Village. If you haven't had a chance to peek in there, it's really neat. So he got the thing built. He and his friends one night were going to take it out and try it, and it was very embarrassing. They hadn't planned ahead. It wouldn't walk through the door. So not only did they have to tear down the door, but they had to tear down some of the brickwork around the door to get it out. And then, so when the landlord heard about it, he was just renting the place. He was a little upset until Henry took him for a ride. And they said it's okay, so they rebuilt it a little wider. Some people say that was one of the first garage doors in America. It wasn't planned that way. Well, his job took him to New York for a convention for the Edison Illuminating Company, and he met Thomas Edison there. As the story goes, Edison didn't know much about these newfangled automobiles, and so they took him aside and they said, this young man has built himself a automobile with gasoline power, because most of the vehicles were steam at that time. And Edison listened, and he slammed his hand down on the table and he said, "You've got it, young man. Self-propelled vehicle using gasoline, not steam. You keep at it, you build those, and you can sell it." And he maintained that a lot of his persistence came from being inspired by Edison, and they became lifelong friends later. If you read enough of this, you get all kinds of different stories, but I did read where someone mentioned this to Edison later in life. He says, "I don't remember that conversation." One of two things, either Edison's memory, or he had inspired a lot of people, you know, and maybe that didn't stand out at the time. Well, he sold his first vehicle and financed a second one. For a second one, he wanted a little better tires, so I went to a local buggy shop. Instead of bicycle tires, he bought some rubber buggy tires from a young salesman named Harvey Firestone. They got reacquainted 10 years later and became lifelong friends. Well, he didn't start out as a successful producer of automobiles. It took him 6 years and 3 tries to achieve success. His first try was in 1899, when he founded the Detroit Automobile Club with several investors. You see, this automobile thing was new, and a lot of people saw money in that. So they would get a group of investors together, and then they'd look for somebody that had built an automobile. There weren't many around. Henry built one. So they hired him as the chief engineer. Well, it failed because they built a kind of a cart, delivery cart kind of thing, and they were looking for more models, and Henry wasn't happy with the quality, he wasn't happy with the product, and he didn't want to put something out there that wasn't right. And investors thought they were going to get immediate profits, so they folded up the company. So he had quit his job at Edison. Here he was without a job. Well, he built a race car called the Sweepstakes, which again is at the Greenfield Village or Henry Ford Museum. And he won a race in Grosse Pointe in 1901. He had a fellow named Alexander Winton. Now Winton had built a few cars and had won a few races, so it was kind of a big deal to beat him. So he got some local publicity. Well, some investors got together and they said, "Oh, let's give this another try. Now Henry has a name." So they called it the Henry Ford Company. And that was the second attempt. Now, how many of you saw that PBS special was running this year on Henry Ford? It was quite well done. Some of my more nitpicky research friends will nitpick some of the things. But the thing that bothered me the most is they left out his second company. They just left it out. They went right from their automobile company to his third company. And this is such an interesting story because here he was, they founded the Henry Ford Company with his name on it. And again, he was kind of slowing down on getting the models out there. They became exasperated. So a fellow named Henry Leland came to them, and he had an engine that was about 4 times the horsepower of the engines that a lot of companies were using. And so they hired Henry Leland to bring his engine in. I think they decided they couldn't afford both these guys. So they gave Henry Ford $900 for his body design and sent him packing. Well, here he was without a job again, but another problem, the Henry Ford Company had a Henry Ford Company and no Henry Ford. So they had to come up with a name. So they renamed it Cadillac after the French pioneer who had established Detroit, and that's how Cadillac started. So indirectly, Henry Ford was involved in the start of Cadillac. Well, he went back to racing again. This time he built a bigger one. Built one called the 999, shown here. Now, he had had a couple of minor accidents racing the sweepstakes and smartly concluded that he was a good engineer but not a very good driver. So he looked around for anyone who had driven race cars and couldn't find him, but he found a championship bicycle driver, Barney Oldfield. And Barney could really make that 999 go. So they started winning races all over the Midwest. So now he's got an even bigger lead. Well, again, some investors came to him, and he kind of was more enthusiastic. This time, started again. This time, in 1903, they incorporated the Ford Motor Company. This is his third attempt. He's 40 years old at this time, and this is the Ford Motor Company that still exists today. He had, his backers put up $28,000. Investors, we'll come back to that later. His first car was called a Model A, shown here. Not the Model A that you're familiar with, probably. There are a few left in the world of this original Model A. In fact, one of them came up for sale on an auction this fall, last fall it was. And Bill Ford, who runs the Ford Motor Company and is a great-grandson of Henry, heard about it. So he sent someone to the auction, not representing him on the surface, because it would drive up the price, and he bought it for $260,000. It was on display at the auto show. It was on display at Greenfield Village during the Little Car Festival. And, but it's Bill Ford's. It's not the museum's car, it's not the company's car, it's Bill Ford's car. So that was kind of a neat thing that he was able to do. So that was the Model A. Well, things are going pretty well now. They start selling a few of these, they're making a little bit of money, and all of a sudden they got a problem. A fellow named George Selden of Rochester, New York, had filed a patent in 1885 applying to all gasoline-powered automobiles. And so they even had an association of licensed automobile manufacturers, and they all had to chip in money and give him to Selden for his patent. Well, Henry said, baloney. He said, first place, Selden never produced a car that ran. Secondly, you can't patent a broad concept like a gasoline-powered automobile. Well, he took it to court and lost, but he appealed, and 2 years later, in 1911, he won. And so he was quite a popular hero, especially among the other car manufacturers. They no longer had to pay Selden, and he got quite a bit of press out of that, by kind of being the underdog. Well, then he began producing cars up through the letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, on up. And they got up to the Model N, and they developed really his first kind of mass-produced one, Model N Runabout, sold about 2,000 automobiles. It was a practical, reliable, fairly inexpensive car. And the story is that he was looking for tires, and he went to Goodyear and Goodrich, and he couldn't get a price because from the beginning, Henry wanted to keep the price of that car down. If he could keep the cost down, then he could keep the price down, he could sell them. And that was a driving thrust of him throughout his career. Well, by then, Harvey Firestone had moved down to Akron, Ohio, and had his own tire manufacturing company. He heard about it, so he approached Henry Ford. And he sold Henry the tires for the Model N Runabout. He said later, you know, I didn't make much profit on those, but he said, I felt there was a Ford in my future. So, and when they sold the Model T, he sold thousands, millions of tires to Henry. He got his profits. So he kept building on up through the alphabet. Well, they came to one in 1908 called Model T. He called it a motor car for the great multitude. It started off by being offered in 4 colors, but this complicated the assembly process. The orders started pouring in. He also used a metal alloy, vanadium, and this gave it more flexible. So a lot of these bigger cars were breaking down, and you've seen pictures of his going up hills and over stumps, and it was pretty flexible because of this vanadium alloy. So he had that, and then he had just a good design. So it was offered in 4 colors, but the orders started pouring in. It was about $950 with the top. $850 without, and it was a good value. So he couldn't keep up with production, so he went out in his plant, looked around, he said, what's holding things up? All the parts are interchangeable, except the darn colors. So some days they had too many red fenders, sometimes they had too few blue hoods. He said, we'll fix that, we'll make them all black. Black was also a little less expensive paint, and dried a little faster, but the main thing was, now everything was standardized. So his famous saying is, you can buy a Model T from me any color you want, as long as it's black. And it stayed black up until right at the end of 1927. Before they phased it out, they started offering a few more colors. Interestingly enough, 1908 was a big year for Henry with the Model T. A friend of mine called me up and he said, I bought some things at an antiques show, and he said, I was unwrapping them and I found a 1908 newspaper, the Detroit Journal. He said, I know you like history, would you like it? And I said, great. So I got the paper and I'm looking for stuff on the Model T or any automotive stuff, and that's the same year that General Motors was founded. I couldn't find anything on automobiles. But I think this is baseball season, is that right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're really good baseball. So here was an article that I'll share with you a little bit from. The Detroit Journal, March 11th, 1908, titled, Tighter Batting Line Will Differ Little from 1907 Makeup. Manager Jennings is also keeping his speed at the head of the list. Either McIntyre or Jones can run bases and are a source of worry to many pitchers. Schaefer and Crawford, following next, can add more worry, while Cobb, the kingpin runner of them all, is slippery as an eel. Opposing teams are on edge and alert when Ty Cobb gets on the bases. His wonderful speed and daring slides contributed to many a victory during 1907. One of the catchers said of Ty Cobb, he said, ordinarily I can get a runner out, throwing him out from when they try to steal. I can get a runner out 8 out of 10 times, but you can't check grease lightning, and Cobb is that and some more. So that was happening in 1908, as well as the Model T. Well, he did some interesting things. In 1914, he increased the workers' pay to $5 a day, reduced the workday from 9 to 8 hours. Now, a lot of people said he's a great humanitarian, and I'm sure it didn't bother him to do that from a humanitarian standpoint, but it was all business. First of all, if you reduce the shift from 9 to 8 hours, now you can have 3 shifts. So he was the only person who was able to use his factories and equipment around the clock and reduce the costs again to get a 3-shift operation. Well, the reason for the workers' pay, the average industry was $2.34 a day at that time. His turnover was terrible. Most of his employees were farmers. They would come into the plants, they were used to doing a lot of things, being active. Now the assembly line was going, they would stand in one place doing one operation, they'd get frustrated, they'd go back to the farm. So Henry said, I bet if we doubled their pay, they'd stay. And he did, and they did. Solved the turnover problem. So that's what that was all about. Now, there was more to the $5 a day than you might realize. First of all, you had to be there 6 months. Second, you got your $2.34 base wage, and the other $2.50 was profit sharing. Can you imagine here a few years ago, the unions and management discovered profit sharing. Henry had it back then. But his profit sharing was a little different, because to qualify for the profit sharing, you had to live right. And so his social department would visit your house. And if there were too many whiskey bottles, or too many people living in cramped quarters, or it wasn't clean, you didn't qualify for your profit sharing. So in his mind, if I'm going to pay these people extra, by golly, they can live right. And in those days, there was no checks and balances, so now, the other business people didn't like that, because everybody now thought that everybody could pay $5 a day. And it did raise the wages in other industries. So. But also, he was starting to now make his employees customers. You see, on the $2.34 a day, people could just afford to rent a house and buy groceries. You double their wages, they could now save to buy a home and a car. So he created a market, and he created our middle class to a large extent. So that was a tremendous benefit to him. And he would cut the cost, because the more volume he had, the less it cost to produce. In 1915, he founded the Henry Ford Hospital. He Detroit, bringing in top staff members from Johns Hopkins Hospital. Well, Henry introduced the assembly line. In 1913, it took 12 and a half hours a chassis to assemble a car. So he developed an assembly line concept at the Paquette plant, which is open for tours if you haven't been there, and implemented it at the New Highland Park plant. See, in the old days, they would just have a chassis, and a group would come over and they'd put on the engine. They'd take their tools and they'd go away, and another group would come over and they'd put on the clutch, and they'd come back and put on other parts and the wheels. And there was a lot of wasted motion. And so they said, well, what if we have the workers and their tools and parts stationary? And to start out, they literally dragged the chassis on a rope down the floor, and had the workers there. And then pretty soon they elevated it to a waist-high thing, and they automated it. And so that's where the assembly line came from. And he was way ahead in the start of that. So the bottom line is it reduced the time from 12 hours to 6 hours a car. So you can imagine it helped reduce the costs, and it helped increase his profits. There was a fellow, this new Highland Park plant was really something, and the assembly line. There was a fellow named Julian Street, who was a reporter for Collier's magazine. He visited the plant, and here's what he wrote, his description of the mass assembly plant. He said, "This looks like a gargantuan lunatic asylum where 15,000 raving, tearing mechanics have been given full authority to go ahead and do their damnedest." That was his description of the plant. But the result of this assembly line was that the original price of $950 in 1908 came down to $260 by 1927. And that's for the same car, actually a better car, because many of the wooden parts were now replaced with metal. So because of that, it was a tremendously popular. It produced over 16 million. It was half the output in the world. He had over 50% of the market share. And I just saw a list of all-time best-selling models, not car companies, but like Mustang, Camaro. The Model T was still number 7 all time. So that's the impact of the Model T. So it made a contribution to the Industrial Revolution and the move to the cities. It replaced the horse as a major means of transportation, and people could now travel to the cities. The very structure of society was changing by reducing the price of the automobile. Well, Henry was building this, planning this huge Rouge plant downriver on the Rouge River, and he kept wanting to plow the profits back into the development. Well, the stockholders said, you know, we're not getting enough payoff from this. And he said, well, keep investing, you'll get it someday. Now, two stockholders, John and Horace Dodge, shown here on the right, took Ford to court. And they said, you know, we own the company, it's our stock, we ought to be able to have a say, and the court upheld it. The company belonged to stockholders, and if they wanted more profits, they could have more profits. Well, he and Edsel didn't like that. So they said, we'll buy them out. So there were 7 stockholders left at that time out of the 12. They bought them out. Remember I said they put in 28,000? They took out 168 million. Jeez. John and Horace Dodge had put in 10,000. They took out 25 million. They had been a supplier to Ford, and they had a small car company of their own. Well, they took that 25 million, and they made it a major car company, Dodge Motor Company. So again, indirectly, he contributed to another competitor, Dodge Motor Company, which is now, of course, part of Chrysler. In 1920, the Ford Motor Company was reorganized with all shares held by Henry, Edsel, and other family members. Henry said, before I will ever have stockholders again, I will personally tear down every one of my plants, brick by brick. So, did he feel strongly about that? Yes. Well, in 1922, at the urging of Edsel, he bought the Lincoln Motor Car Company. Remember Henry Leland, who had come into the Henry Ford Company, and then they changed it to Cadillac. Well, they left Cadillac and formed a company called Lincoln. And they made a good car, but it wasn't doing well financially, so Edsel had been after Henry to have a luxury car, and Henry said, no, the Ford label is reliable and low cost. So they kind of compromised. They said, well, we'll buy another car, a luxury car, but we won't mess with the Ford name. We'll call it, we'll use the Lincoln. So, and I have a feeling that Henry thought, you know, if this goes well, I'll take my share of the credit. If it fails, Edsel will probably catch the blame. So Edsel ran that pretty much, and it worked. They also bought an aircraft company, the Stout all-metal aircraft company, and developed the Ford Tri-Motor. So they had an airline, Ford Airline, they had a Ford Airplane, they had an airport down on Oakwood across from the Dearborn Inn. Dearborn Inn was one of the first airport hotels in the world. People would fly in there and stay at Dearborn Inn. So he's got this Rouge plant being built, and it opened in 1927, and by then they had switched to the Model A, the new Model A. So the plant featured vertical integration of materials, transportation, production, and assembly. He bought coal mines in Kentucky, set up the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Railroad to support bringing coal to the Rouge plant. He set up sawmills and iron ore mills in the UP, acquired a fleet of Great Lakes freighters to haul wooden ore to the Rouge plant. He bought a glass works and hauled sand on freighters from the Great Lakes sand dunes. 28 hours after raw materials arrived at the Rouge plant, they emerged as automobiles. Largest plant in the world. And this is what fascinated me when I ran across this. Largest industrial plant in the world. Not 1 cent was borrowed money. It was all profits from the Model T. Can you imagine building the world's largest manufacturing plant today without any borrowed capital? So that shows you how, what the impact again of the Model T was in Henry's life. Well, again, things are going pretty well for Henry now, but the competition's coming on. General Motors was founded, Chevrolet, and the other companies would have conventional gear shifts. Henry still had his planetary gears with 3 pedals. They had hydraulic brakes, he had mechanical brakes. He had a 4-cylinder engine, they had 6 and 8 cylinders. They had colors, he didn't. So here's a 1925 Chevrolet and a 1925 Model T. And you know, it's kind of pretty obvious that there's a lot more car there. And so the Chevrolet started taking off and selling, and a lot of Henry's people knew they needed new models, but he was stubborn. So he and Clara went on their first trip abroad. Well, the engineer said, you know, Henry's a hands-on guy. Maybe instead of telling him about a new model, we'll show it to him. So they built a prototype of something they thought would be good. And Henry got back from his cruise, and they took him into the design area and showed him proudly this new prototype. He walked over to it, he tore off one door, he tore off another door, he took off his shoe, he smashed the windshield, beat dents in the top. By now he's swearing at the top of his voice and walked out. I think there was never another unauthorized prototype built at Ford while Henry was around. No. So he wouldn't give it up. Well, finally, it became obvious that the Model T was over. So he shut his plants down for 5 months in 1927, retooled for the new Model A, started building them at the Rouge plant. The Model A enjoyed solid but not spectacular success. It was a very good automobile, but the competitors had jumped ahead. Walter Chrysler had started his company and was doing well. So his stubbornness had cost him the leadership position in the industry. And the Model A was soon outsold by General Motors, Chevrolet, and Chrysler's. Model A was discontinued in 1931, not because it was a bad car, but because he did have one more good innovation in his career, and that was the V8 engine in 1932. But it wasn't enough. In 1936, the Ford company was third in sales in the industry behind GM and Chrysler. So the sales volume was falling, the Great Depression in 1929 came along, he had to cut wages, and this authoritarian control had led to a lot of poor attitudes between him and his employees. He used to feel close to his employees. And there was another force going on in the world, and that was the unions. GM and Chrysler had unionized, but Ford wouldn't have anything to do with it. So here's a famous Battle of the Overpass. He freely employed company police, labor spies, and violence in a protracted effort to prevent unionization. This is Walter Reuther on the left here, and Richard Frankenstein on the right, and they were going to cross over this overpass to pass out pamphlets on Ford property. And his security department, which was ex-convicts and other thugs, beat him up pretty badly. The press was there, and so it got a lot of bad press. But he wouldn't settle anyway. So this kept going on. It wasn't until 1941. The violence kept going. Clara said to Henry, enough. He wouldn't settle. She said, I'm going to leave you. I don't want to be involved in this violence. So she said she'd leave him if he did. So he did. Interesting fact, up until then, they were open shops. You didn't have to belong to the union. When Henry settled, they gave him the best contract ever. It was a clothes shop. You had to belong to the union. So he was kind of either all or none. When he finally settled, it was one of the best contracts for the union. Although Edsel served as president for many years, Henry was always a real power. He didn't even have a title. He just was Henry Ford. Edsel died in 1943, and Henry resumed the presidency. Well, by 1943, there was a multinational company. It had tremendous competitors. Henry was still stubborn. The whole family didn't really want him to come back, but he wouldn't step down. So Eleanor Ford, Edsel's widow, was pretty smart. She put on her thinking cap and she said, what would be his hot button? So she went to Henry and said, if you don't step down, I'm going to sell my stock to the public. And then you're going to have stockholders. And that did it. So he stepped down and brought in her son, Henry Ford II, sometimes referred to as Hank the Deuce. He had come out of the Navy about a year before that, was working in the company. And so he was 28 years old when he became president. He brought in some young people that he met in college and in the Navy called the whiz kids, they referred to them. And they turned the company around. One of them was William McNamara, who later became Secretary of Defense and head of the World Bank. Henry Ford II also had brothers William Clay and Benson and sister Josephine. Well, this has kind of followed Henry's career up through the automotive side, but let's kind of look at a little bit more of the personal side and some of the more controversial side of Henry. He was quoted as saying, history is more or less bunk. It turned out that he really meant ancient history. He didn't think much of studying the Greeks and the Romans, but he believed that you should study recent American history. But that was quoted. But he was a pacifist, and the Chicago Tribune editorial called him ignorant idealist because he opposed us getting into the First World War. So he sued the paper for $1 million for libel. Well, he had to testify during the trial, and it was quite embarrassing. Henry had never educated himself broadly. He educated himself technically. He had a couple of years of a business school part-time, and he went to the 8th grade, and then he had a year of a little technical school, but never educated himself broadly. So he got in there, and he could not answer questions that most school kids could. They said, for instance, this country was founded during a war. What was that war? He said, oh yeah, that was a war 1812. And, and then, of course, they mocked his knowledge, and some people said he was never quite the same after that. It really kind of took a toll on it, but he bounced back. But the jury found in favor of him. They said you were liable. But they couldn't find overwhelming financial damages, so they awarded him 6 cents. And so again, being a pacifist, Henry was all black or white. You know, he's either for something or against it, for a person or against it. Not a lot of gray in his world. So some of the pacifists got his ear, and they said, you know, if we go over to Europe and get all the Allies together and the Germans together, we can stop World War I. But by continuous negotiation, we'll all get in a room and just negotiate until it's over. Congress can't even figure that out. So, but anyway, so he chartered a ship for $1 million called the Peace Ship. A bunch of pacifist group got on it, and off they went for Europe. There was so much infighting between the groups that by the time they got there, Henry was pretty disillusioned. He came back home. He left them over there for a year. They didn't accomplish anything. And so it was a grand failure. And but Henry Ford, when people would say, well, you know, that cost you $1 million. Well, I got $1 million worth of publicity out of it. And there was some truth to that. A lot of people thought at least he was trying to stop the war. So, did you know that he had a political career? Well, he did. There was a seat in the Senate from Michigan. Seat coming up in 1918. And President Wilson went to him and he said, you know, we really need this seat. And he said, you know, we think you can win. You're the only one. I don't want to. Yeah, I'm not a politician. Wilson kept after him. He said, okay, I'll run on 2 conditions. I won't campaign and I won't spend any of my money. They knew who I am. I'm Henry Ford. They'll either vote for me or they won't. Well, they didn't. So he was defeated by a fellow named Truman Newberry, and not too big a spread actually, but that was the end of his political campaign. I think he was probably just as happy. Well, here's the part you'd probably rather have us forget about. In 1918, he purchased a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent, and they published a series of articles called the International Jew. They were authorized by Ford, but written by William Cameron, shown here, the editor of the paper. They blamed Jewish Eastern bankers for financing war and denigrated the Jewish elite as being the problem for virtually all that was wrong in the world. Now, Henry never liked bankers. He never liked to borrow money. And the Eastern establishment, a lot of the bankers were Jewish. And so, you know, it kind of fit in with part of his experience, but again, he tended to be a black and white thinker, so he went along with all this. But he distinguished between individual Jews that he knew as good and righteous people. He had a friend, Rabbi Leo Franklin in Detroit, and architect Albert Kahn, who designed over 1,000 Ford buildings for him. So he kind of compartmentalized them. Well, in 1927, a Jewish farm laborer said he'd been slandered by the paper, filed a lawsuit, and Ford formally retracted his attacks and shut down the paper. But I have a friend who will come to me in my presentations on Henry Ford. He's Jewish, and he says, no. Again, you know, we like our heroes to be pure, don't we? And, we don't allow them much leeway sometimes. So, well, on a more positive note, Henry and Clary had fun. They had met dancing, and so they revitalized old-style dance and sponsored dances at which capitalists, European royalty, and company executives were introduced to the polka, the Virginia reel, the quadrille, and the Sir Roger de Coverley. And if you were an executive at Ford, you better learn those dances, and you better at least pretend to be having fun, because it was real important anyway. Now, he heard that the Botsford Inn in Farmington was being torn down for the expansion of Grand River. Well, he and Clara had danced there, and so he bought it. He tore it down, moved it back a few hundred feet, and rebuilt it, using the same techniques he later used at Greenfield Village. He did make a few improvements. There's a dance floor on the 2nd floor. His knees were getting a little stiff, so he put rubber bushings under the dance floor. The Botsford Hospital bought that. They tore down most of it for a cancer center, but they left the core building there, and the dance floor is still there in that core building. I'm hoping they'll open it someday. I used to have my group doing presentations, interactive presentations with Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, and Thomas Edison for tour groups. They would come from around the country, have dinner there, and meet Ford, Firestone, and Edison. So I'm hoping that they still a little meeting room there, but that was his love of dance. Well, he also had a lot of fun with his friends, Harvey Firestone and Thomas Edison. They went on camping trips. John Burroughs, a naturalist, went with him on some trips, and Luther Burbank, a naturalist. But they were dubbed the vagabonds by the press, and Ford and Firestone evidently would go hiking for exercise and chop wood and things, and somebody asked Edison, do you do that? He said, no. He said, I detest exercise. He said, my philosophy is the sole purpose of the body is to support the brain, and therefore should not be agitated. Now you can see that their camping wasn't real strenuous. They're all wearing suits. This particular year, the fellow in the middle in the white shirt is President Harding, who accompanied him. And So they finally, and here's a tent. The drivers would come, they would set up the tents, they would set up the electric lights that Edison had rigged up from battery-powered refrigerator. Mr. Ford's executive chef Cato would cook gourmet meals. He had a lazy Susan table here at this particular meeting. The wives were attending also. So it wasn't a particularly strenuous camping, but they had a lot of fun. There's an interesting story too. On one of their trips with President Harding, they were out in West Virginia, and they were in a Buick, or not a Buick, they were in a Lincoln, and it bogged down in the mud. So the chauffeur went, and he found a farmer with a Model T. And so the farmer pulled him out of the wood, out of the mud. So Henry went up and he said, "Thank you, sir." He said, "I'm the fellow who built this car, Henry Ford." Harvey Firestone said, "I'm the one who made those tires. I'm Harvey Firestone. Do you know who these gentlemen are?" The farmer said, "No." He said, "Well, this is Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, and this is President of the United States, Mr. Harding." The farmer looks kind of skeptical. And so Luther Burbank, who had a white beard, said to him, "Do you know who I am?" He says, "Well, if you're the same kind of darn liar as these guys, I suppose you can tell me you're Santa Claus." A week later, a local Ford dealer showed up at the farmer with a brand new Model T. So the farmer finally found out who he had met. Well, another interesting thing Henry did is he completed the Rouge plant, and it was bigger than he even expected. But he still had a lot of parts small parts that he was buying. He didn't like to buy small parts. He liked to cut out the middleman. So he said, you know, rather than add some more to the Rouge, I think I'll set up a bunch of small plants around southeastern Michigan called Village Industries. And I'll only make one part. For instance, Northville, where I live, has made all the valves for the Model Ts. And he said the workers could be farmers. Many of them, they can continue to farm part-time. They can walk to work or drive a short distance. They don't have to commute down to the Rouge plant. And they'll have a nice rural life. Like his friend Thomas Edison said, well, if you're going to do that, well, there are a lot of streams in southeastern Michigan. A lot of them have grist mills on them, and they use hydroelectric power. Why don't you set up your plants with water wheels? It won't provide all the power for your plants, but it'll help cut your costs. Well, you say cut your cost to Henry Ford, you have his attention, so that's what he did. So there's some 25 village industries scattered throughout southeastern Michigan, and most of them have water wheels for power. And to thank Edison for that, he gave him a brand new Model T every year for Christmas. He also built one-room schools in rural areas. So sometimes he would go into a rural area and find there was no school, he would build it with his own money. And vocational training was emphasized. And he fostered a theory of education based on practical experience and application. I'm a member of the Northville Historic Society, and we have the Northville Historic Village. And we have a schoolhouse there. And we bring kids in the third grade to spend the day with the teacher. They don't experience a one-room school where they're all different ages, but they pretend. But we have a set of the famous McGuffey readers there. Well, Henry Ford was educated on McGuffey readers. And but he tried to get a set made, and he found there was not a complete set. So on his business travels, he would go personally into bookstores looking for these missing volumes. When he found a complete set, he turned it over to a publisher. And so now our school, for instance, in Northville, has complete sets of the McGuffey readers up through the 6th reader that these kids can use as part of their education. He experimented with soybeans for food and durable goods. And they made plastics from soybeans. And they found their way into Ford automobiles. At one point, about 10 or 20% of the cars were early types of plastic made from soybeans, knobs and dashboards and things like that. Well, here's a famous picture of him hitting the trunk of a car with a sledgehammer. And the trunk was made out of plastics from soybeans. And it bounced back and didn't leave a dent. Well, again, do some more reading and you find that the first time they shot this, they handed Henry the axe. Well, he was used to chopping wood. What do you do with an axe? Which way do you swing it? You swing it with a blade first. So he split the trunk. And so they had to quickly hit another trunk and have him swing an axe for the picture here that bounced back. And I'm told that the carbon plastics finally proved out to be better than soybean plastics, and that kind of guy. He had a cultural side. He sponsored the Ford Music Hour, a weekly one-hour radio show. A variety of music from folk to classics was played by the Detroit Symphony, and quaint essays were read to plain folks. They were written by guess who? Look familiar? William Cameron, the former editor of the Dearborn Independent, who got him in so much trouble. Henry was loyal, so he found something for Cameron to do. Another thing you're all familiar with is that he constructed Greenfield Village. Opened in 1929, and he moved Edison's New Jersey laboratory there, where he invented the electric lamp, and the Wright brothers' original bicycle shop, and a lot of other original buildings there. The second part of it was his museum. He had been collecting appliances and automobiles, not just Fords, and he wanted people to be able to experience the technical part of history by seeing, not by just reading about it. And he had no place for these, so now he created a museum for these treasures. And the third part was the Edison Institute on the premises where students went to school. And we were talking earlier, some of you are their daughters went to the school there. I've met people that went to the school. And some of them lived on the grounds, some of them just went, but they used the buildings, the school buildings and other buildings on the grounds. And then he had a trade school that was not on the grounds later, and ran into a lot of people going to the Ford Trade School. Well, here's another part that you'd probably rather have us forget about, but it was quietly rumored that he had a mistress, Steve Dallinger. Circumstantial evidence suggested that he fathered a son with her about the time his grandchildren were being born. Even her husband were longtime employees of the company. Eve's son John would later write a book speculating that Henry was his father. At first we didn't spend much time on this, but I thought, well, you know, it's a rumor, and in fairness, why did so many people believe it? So if you go a little deeper, you run into a little bit more information. Evangeline Dallinger was head of the Ford Steno department at age 19, very capable and very attractive. She worked as a secretary for Harold Wills, one of the executives, and for Henry Ford. Henry would drive her home sometimes after working late. She married Ray Dallinger, a Ford manager, in 1917. When baby John was born in 1923, she was 29 and Henry was 60. Henry visited her at the hospital the day he was born, like did many other employees. And supposedly Ray moved to his own bedroom on the other side of the house about that time. John was baptized in Henry's christening gown, as again he probably did for a lot of other employees. And Henry insisted that the baby sleep in the crib that Henry slept in as an infant. Henry gave John a live Shetland pony when he was a month old, set up a Ford dealership for Eve's mother, father and brother, gave Ray's mother a 200-acre farm in Belleville, gave the Dallingers a 300-acre farm near Romeo, and a vacation retreat in UP, where she had her own seaplane that she flew. He built the Dallingers a 150-acre estate close to his Fairlane home. It was the second most magnificent residence in the area. It had a secret staircase to Eve's bedroom suite. Henry had a little electric boat that took him up the Rouge River from Fairlane to her house. When John asked his mother years later if his father was Ray or Henry, her response was, "I don't want to talk about it." She maybe didn't know, for sure. Anyway, Clara seemed to tolerate the situation most of the time, and even socialized with the Dallingers. But in 1929, when they were getting ready to open the museum in the village, they had a big dinner to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Edison's invention of electric light. And there's a big painting at the museum of this banquet. And so Henry went in to view it before it was finished. And they pointed out some of the different people. He said, "Who's that?" I said, that's Eve Dallinger. He says, "Take her out." Clara wouldn't like that. So she's not in that painting. Well, in short, Henry Ford was a man who baffled even those who observed him close at hand. He was progressive, but also had deep roots in the past. He poo-pooed history and yet established one of the world's leading historical museums. James Cousins, Ford's business manager from the founding of the company until he turned the presidency over to Edsel in 1915, said it best: "You cannot analyze genius, and Ford is a genius." Henry also had a difficult relationship with his son Edsel. Somehow Edsel was never tough enough, never mean enough to suit Henry. Henry had a mean streak, gathered around him tough, mean-spirited yes men like Harry Bennett. The story that I remember about Harry Bennett is he had an office on the second floor of the plant. Called in an executive one day, pointed out the window and said, "Look out there." The fellow looked out there. There was a desk on the lawn. He said, "What's that?" He says, "That's your desk." Gave a signal, the guy poured a bucket of gasoline on it and lit it, burned it up, turned and said, "You're fired." Now it's one thing to fire somebody. There's another thing to revel in nastiness. And there are many other stories about Harry Bennett. Whether Henry knew how nasty he was or not is debatable. So Etzel's death in 1943 of stomach cancer at age 49 took kind of a toll on Henry. And then he was out of the company, turned over to Henry II. So for the next 2 years, he lived quietly at Fairlane Manor, their home on the Rouge River. Now, the Fairlane Manor, used to be open. It's been closed a couple of years. It was owned by the University of Michigan Dearborn, but with the cuts in educational money, they weren't keeping it up. It was deteriorating. So it now merged with the Elmer and Etzel home in Grosse Pointe. And so there's a infusion of money. They're fixing it up and it'll hopefully be open, hopefully next summer or sometime. It is open. Pardon?
It is open.
Not to the public. Were you there on the birthday?
Well, my grandson was just there.
What? Oh, really? Oh, that's late news. Thank you. They must be having a few people. It wasn't supposed to open until next summer. Wonderful. Okay. Well, that's news. They moved it up. Great. It was open on his birthday for a few people. I was down there then. So, but anyway, he died April 7th, 1947, at age 83, exactly 100 years after his father came to Michigan from Ireland. He had his own powerhouse there, and spring flooding knocked out the power in the powerhouse. So this master of industry died as simply as he came into the world, in a house heated by a wood fireplace and lit by candlelight. More than 20,000 people paid their respects at his funeral in his beloved museum. His Ford stock went to the Ford Foundation, making it the world's richest private foundation. Henry had a lot of quotes. You can't build a reputation on what you're going to do. Before everything else, getting ready is the secret of success. Failure is the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. The market is never saturated with a good product, but is very quickly saturated by a bad one. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. I have a handout for you here that has some more quotes on it that you can have afterwards. And, a couple of them are interesting. I don't know if they're on that sheet, but they're, he saw the Ford as a car for everyone, not for society. So one of his quotes was, "Buy a Ford, spend the difference." Another one, "A Ford will take you anywhere except into society." The one I got a kick out of was, "Study the history of almost any criminal, and you will find an inveterate cigarette smoker." Not smoke or drink. Well, he never wrote much but little jot books that he carried in his pocket with ideas, but he did author 3 books in his life written by a fellow named Samuel Crowther. And also William Cameron, his old buddy, helped him write papers on subjects from the evils of smoking and theories on educational reform. Well, you remember Lee Iacocca? He's a guy that rose up to the presidency of Ford. And Henry Ford II, Hank the Deuce, was chairman and fired him. When they asked Hank the Deuce why he fired him, he said, "I never liked him." And that was all. And, two big egos. But again, Iacocca went on to Chrysler and saved Chrysler. So again, indirectly, Ford contributed to that. But he tells a little about the story about the only time he met Henry Ford. So the only time I met Henry Ford, he looked at me and probably wondered, who is this little squirt fresh out of college? He wasn't real big on college graduates, and I was one of 50 in the Ford training class in September 1946, working on a huge drafting room at the enormous River Rouge plant near Detroit. One day there was a big commotion at one end of the floor, and in walked Henry Ford with Charles Lindbergh. They walked down my aisle asking men what they were doing. I was working on a mechanical drawing of a clutch spring, which drove me out of engineering forever. And I was worried that they asked me a question because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I'd only been there 30 days. And evidently, They did stop and shake hands, and a month later, or 7 months later, Henry Ford died. So that was, we had a brief experience with him. But he was an eccentric genius who helped make modern America create the middle class. Without his drive to create a mass market for cars, we might not have a middle class today. We probably would, but it might have taken 30, 40 years longer without his threats. He was a genius and eccentric and no prince in his social attitudes and politics. His mark on history is almost unbelievable when you take the stock of his impact on us. He helped lead America to the forefront of nations and became a symbol of the American dream. He was a world leader in creating the assembly line, the record-setting Model T, the River Rouge plant, and the $5 a day wage, enabling his workers to buy their cars. His tenacity in the creation of his motor car was connected to other aspects of his character, admirable and despicable alike. He was anti-intellectual and anti-Semitic. Over his lifetime, his pride in his workmen degenerated into snarling anti-unionism. Again, we like our heroes to be one-dimensional, but when you start thinking of other heroes, Dwight Eisenhower, Franklin Roosevelt, Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Bill Clinton, they were human beings, and I think sometimes we need to allow all of our heroes to be human. From the time he was young, friends wondered whether he was a farm boy with a touch of mechanic, or a mechanic with a touch of farm boy. At any rate, they all concluded he was a true genius. This man who did much to free mankind from the horse and loathed the farm chores of his boyhood, in the end, preserved a large piece of rural life for history at Greenfield Village in the Henry Ford Museum. Just a note on his grandsons and great-grandsons. He had one son, Edsel. So, one grandson, Henry II, is deceased, ran Ford Motor Company. His son, Edsel Ford II, is a board member of Ford and owns Pentastar Aviation, which he bought from Chrysler. Another grandson, William Clay Ford, is still alive. And what does he do? He owns the Detroit Lions. And I don't know how they're doing today, but he's trying to have himself a championship team. His son, Bill Ford, William Clay Ford Jr., is executive chairman of Ford Motor Company. So the Ford Motor Company is still run by a great-grandson of Henry Ford. So this presentation has been promoted by part of the Henry Ford 150 project, and this is a great website, www.henryford150.com. It's not hard to remember. Henry Ford, it's 150th anniversary.com. Now, if you go in there, you'll find under events, there's a button at the top, you'll find events listed like this. This event was listed there, so people can attend them. There's another button at the top that's neat, and that is interviews with Bill Ford and Edsel Ford II. Short interviews, but they're nice. There's a button down at the bottom. I don't know if you noticed my shirt, but it's a Henry Ford 150, and they have some merchandise that you can order. It's all kinds of little souvenir things for Henry Ford 150. Well, I'm going to hand out some timelines here, and you can, there's some quotes on the other side. This is kind of a timeline. Oh, on the Henry Ford 150 side too, there's a timeline, and there's you can click on it, and it has little paragraphs, so this whole life is really quite interesting. It covers a lot of the things that we covered today.
David, we should have some different colors.
Yeah.
Is there any around?
Model A's?
No, the colors. Like you said, they were red.
Oh, what do you mean?
The body, instead of doing black, you said.
In Model T or Model A?
I don't know, I can't remember which one.
The Model T had 4 colors at first. Yes, there are a few of those around.
Is there?
And not a lot, but there are a few the collectors have. And then, of course, the new Model A came out in colors. Yeah.
I've often wondered where people purchased gasoline right at first. Were there gas stations at that time?
Interesting. they grew as the need grew, I guess. I'm not real familiar with the history of the gasoline industry, but yeah, they had to spring up. A lot of people were farmers, and so they would have in tractors. We didn't even get into his tractor business. We didn't get into the bomber plant during the war. We tried to keep this fairly short, but that's a whole other story. The bomber plant at Willow Run, but yeah, I think that a lot of them again were on farms, and they would probably have a truck come around and have a tank at the farm originally. Yes.
I don't think a lot of people realize that in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, that Henry Ford owned the Wayside Inn in Sudbury, Massachusetts. He was the one that Longfellow wrote his poem about. And he had a school for orphan boys out there. They opened in 1927. And he had 5,000 acres, his own sawmill. And when the hurricane came through there in 1938, he had wherever the boys had been having their chapel service in the inn. But when the hurricane came through and fell on the trees, Henry Ford had the boys and workers, skilled tradesmen, and of course he had his own sawmill there. And they built a copy of the Martha Mary Chapel, which today is a wedding chapel. We've been out there.
Yeah, he had places. He had, of course, a summer home in Florida. Fort Myers, right next to Edison's. If you ever get a chance to see that, that's really interesting. He had a rubber plantation in South America. So, yeah, just a lot more.
He had his farm in Richmond Hills, Georgia, where he had about 80,000 acres or something. Had a school there, and we've been to that chapel too.
Yeah.
And that's a Roman Catholic church now.
Very good.
It's fascinating.
Yes.
What about repairing the car? Did he own repair shops at the car?
Well, to start out with, you got a toolkit, and they were fairly simple to repair.
Oh,
And again, many of the early owners were farmers, and they were used to repairing equipment and they had skills. So. And then, of course, there's more of the middle class, office workers, and people that didn't live on farms. And then, of course, the service stations sprung up.
Yeah, I have 10 wrenches with the Henry Fords, with the script board on them, and when you bought those things, you got the tools and stuff with it.
Mm-hmm. Neat.
I think I got 10.
Wow, those are probably worth something.
Probably something like that.
Okay, one more question. Yeah.
Was he religious? He was Irish. Was he religious?
He was Episcopal, there's not a lot of religious stuff in his life, but they went to church. He and Clara buried down on Ford Road. Near Joy Road. Around Joy Road.
St. Martha's Episcopal Church.
Down near St. Martha's. And with some brothers and sisters, but none of the rest of the family buried. And somebody mentioned the other day, there's a little fence about this high. And it's amazing. That's not a nice neighborhood. It's amazing that those headstones and things are still there. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Russell. It was a great meeting.
Nice group.
Yep. And we'll try to get you back here again sometime. Just a couple of comments. I think everybody in the room knows the connections to Henry Ford in the area with Weller's, which was one of his village industries where they made the soybean parts. And so we know there's a strong connection there. We had the Ford plant here for many years. Now it's Forcia, but it still makes Ford interior parts. And we suspect that Henry Ford stopped at the Renster farm at some time and purchased some produce from his grandfather or somebody there. We suspect that may be true. But yes.
My granddad owned a used model E pickup. He called it tiny, that's German for Henry.
Well, great program. One thing that Leslie asked to do is to pass out this little survey for people to take a look at and fill it out if you can.